Well, of course, there is a long history of establishing marine protected areas, especially within national jurisdiction, close to the coast. And many countries have engaged in a very active program of establishing, marine protected areas. Many of those are in relationship to local communities, local fishermen, small isolated outposts, where they do can exert some stewardship of the resources they are exploiting. So they are very, very well designed in that sense, and they do have a lot of support from the local communities. These are the most successful examples. So right now there is an effort to extend protection to other areas of the ocean, in the open ocean, in the high seas. High seas is a legal term. We prefer to speak of the open ocean, the deep sea. The international waters don't have truly a well-established governance and jurisdiction. So no government is responsible in particular of managing the resources out there in the open ocean. There is collective responsibility of the international community. So we have been facing difficulties there, and I think that is part of the problem why some of these initiatives, in this case it's not marine protected areas we're working for establishing and defining, describing areas that comply with 7 criteria that were established here in the CVD, scientific criteria. So this is scientific information that's been transformed into an instrument that can be used by managers, by decision makers. So these are the so-called ecological and biological significant areas. So by moving in areas in which until now nothing has been depicted in terms of the relative importance, by providing that information we hope that we're helping to improve the situation in terms of management. This is the main thrust behind this initiative.
I guess it's hard for your average people to really understand the state of the oceans, given at best we go down for our summer holidays and sit next to the seaside, but right in the middle of the oceans clearly there are different elements at work. If you were a doctor of the oceans, what would you say the state of your patient is at the moment?
Oh, we have to monitor very closely, and I think it's in observation, under observation. It is so much so that is an agreement adopted by all the head of states where they were meeting in Johannesburg 2002, where they decided to establish a regular process to assess the ocean every 4 or 5 years regularly, and to do that in order to ascertain the level of impact, of human impact on the natural systems. In fact, the General Assembly of the United Nations in 2010 approved the first cycle of this process, and right now we are we're engaged since 2010 until 2014 in the first global ocean assessment. So this will give us a handle on how well are we doing in terms of managing, what are the issues, what are the problems, what are the gaps of information, data. The open ocean is an area in which we still don't have all the data and information that we would like to have. So there must be a continuous effort to really put more investment into learning, filling those gaps in order to improve our management. The big issue, as I said, I think in the open ocean is how do we close the loop of accountability? You see, in national jurisdiction, at the end you have the accountability established by the laws of the country. So you cannot escape the fact that you are doing wrong. Even an authority, if doing wrong, will be replaced in a political cycle, will be replaced. But nothing like that exists in the open ocean. So the cycle of accountability is open. Everybody can do almost anything out there, and without the proper citizen control is very risky. And so we're facing some of those risks as of today. So this is why there is this sort of push for improving the availability of information, crunching all this data and information, bringing it from the science, from the universities, from the research centers, towards the policymakers, so they can be informed, to inform better decision making. This is the main effort.
I mean, I guess if I was going to be cynical for a second, you could argue that looking at the climate debate, you can have as much data as you want, and you can have an intergovernmental organisation which is dedicated to searching and releasing that data, but it doesn't seem to make it much difference on a political level. What makes you think that having more data as far as ocean acidification or the numbers of fish in the sea would make any difference at all?
I think you touch a very sensitive point. We can always say that many of these processes have been stalling because of lack of political will, and that probably is true. I was part of the process leading to Copenhagen, and there was a very, very major failure of the international community after 10 years of working very seriously under the United Nations Framework Convention. We came to a stall, an abrupt stall in Copenhagen, and I think we're still, working to recover part of the momentum that we were carrying with that. So I think this is in part due to what you just said. I mean, no matter how much information you put out there, the decisions at the end are political, and it is therefore policymaking and politics is influenced by citizens. The unfortunate thing in the ocean is that we don't have citizens in the open ocean, and the fish don't vote. So in that sense, we have a very open loop, sociological. The people that spend most of their life in the ocean is a tiny minority of humanity. And the other factor that you were, introducing the issue of the ocean being complex, it is complex because most of the ocean is invisible. We don't see the ocean. And in a planetary sense, the ocean is thinner than the skin of an apple to an apple. If you look at the dimensions of the planet, the radius of the Earth is 6,300 kilometers roughly, and the deepest, part of the ocean is 10 kilometers, and the average depth is 4 kilometers. So you're comparing 4 kilometers to 6,300. So it's 1/10,000th of this is the thickness of the ocean. So it's a very thin layer for the planet. Most people don't get this view of the ocean. You see it's an immense, huge amount of water. It is, because that is what makes the planet inhabitable. I mean, it's the water in the ocean. All the rest of the water is less than 3% that is on short-term loan from the ocean. All the one that rains, the rivers, the lakes, it's in fact part of the water cycle. And the water cycle, the repository is the ocean. So in a sense, this view of the importance of the ocean, I don't think is shared with most of the people on our citizens of the earth. And in that sense, we have to take responsibility in terms of our own schooling. We don't really teach what it means to live in a planet like the earth.
Is picking up on what you've just said, is education then, perhaps, could that just be the most effective way of actually attempting to solve this issue, as opposed to maybe legally binding targets or quotas? Is it worth sort of saying to every government, you need to go back and adopt this as part of your national curriculum and teach kids what the issues are?
That will be a big help, and education would always help us, not only with understanding the planet, but also having better citizenship and therefore and heightened likelihood of having political accountability and political will. And educating populace and educating people will certainly make those leaders more accountable, definitely.
And a final question, picking up on your past as sort of Chile's, am I right, Chile's fisheries minister?
Yeah. And the Secretary of State, yes.
Absolutely. It's hard to imagine a country which has more coastline per sort of square mile or inhabitants, very thin, with an enormous coastline. Politically, what do you think might be acceptable for leaders over the next decade in terms of resolving this situation?
I think more and more leaders are aware that they cannot act in independence. We need to really give some spirit to embody what it means, this term that we repeat and repeat in international community. What does it mean? I mean, this is collective responsibility of political leaders, at the end representing their state. They are not very often representing truly their citizenry. So in that sense, there is some difficulties in the international scene. But nevertheless, it is, I think, leaders are understanding that they cannot act in isolation. Many of the issues, in particular those of the ocean, link us together. So we have to provide collective solutions. I mean, neither fish, neither pollution will respect any of the boundaries that we draw on the ocean. national, international jurisdiction, they move around. The nature of the ocean is a fluid. So any parcel of water can be here, but can be in any other place of the ocean tomorrow. And this is sort of missed. And so not even the traditional legal terms, sovereignty in the traditional Westphalian sense has validity in the ocean. So we need to revise even our fundamental tenets of legal order.
On a final point, when you look at perhaps the whaling debate, there are only a few countries who are involved in actively whaling, be it for scientific purposes or whatever. Is this an issue that could perhaps be solved or resolved with just a few countries, or with a collection of 10 to 15 countries who are the worst offenders when it comes to polluting the oceans? Or do you need to have a kind of a global consensus, which is always harder to achieve?
I think that probably a global consensus will be a big, strong statement. The International Whaling Commission is one of the oldest, international bodies trying to regulate the use of some resources. And of course, I'm nobody to question the wisdom of the decisions, but in that sense, there is clearly a very open and vocal movement to really try to put a stop to unfair use of these resources. And most of the whales are under very strict protection. There are moratorium by the International Whaling Commission of most of the species. This is because we realize that we have almost exterminated some of them, and very few of them are recovering. I was just involved in a program in the Western Pacific, in the north of Sakhalin Peninsula in Russia, where I can tell you exactly how many whales, gray whales, were there, because we count them every year, and there were 136. So, and how do you protect a very small population like that? I mean, we mark them, we trace them, they can migrate up to Mexico, go back, but this is a very tiny population, so all kind of measures to protect, and we were very happy to IUCN to have been able to involve, in this case, an oil and gas exploitation company to adopt mitigation measures whenever they were doing surveying. They use sound, very energetic sound in the ocean that can disrupt the normal behavior of whales. So they were following our guidelines. They suspended their operations if there were whales around. We have independent observers. So it's a unique case. I don't think that it's a success case, a story, because in a sense you always see this divide between conservationists and industry. It's not the case. In this case, it's a fully financed program by the company, the oil company. They're very successful.
Final question. Talking of oil companies, the Arctic, been in the news for the past few years, but in particular the past few months, given the rapidly melting ice in the summer. What if you were and I don't know if you are, but if you were a betting man, what chance would there be on any kind of resolution, any kind of protected area agreement on the Arctic?
Well, much of the Arctic is under national jurisdiction, and it's a very close club of nations that defend their exclusivity of talking about the issues in the territorial waters and in the jurisdictional waters. But the center of the Arctic is international waters. So again, it is the international community, the responsibility of taking care of that part of the ocean. The Arctic Ocean is the international community, not just they have a primary responsibility, but they certainly need to also allow for the views and opinion of the international community. So I think the Arctic, without a permanent ice cover, will be a completely different habitat. In that sense, there will be a lot of shipping. There is an advantageous route to be used between Asia and the Pacific, and it will be used if it is open and safe. And there will be exploitation of the many very abundant resources of gas and oil in the Arctic shelf, Russia, USA, Canada. So it's a different future for the Arctic. We need to be very careful, and hopefully we can still have time to adopt precautionary measures to do that.